Autumn 2023 arrived damp and cold on the plains of Donbas. Mud clung to boots, the low sky threatened rain, and the air carried the constant smell of churned earth and explosive smoke. Avdiivka, once a quiet industrial city, had become one of the hottest sectors on the eastern front. There the armed forces of Ukraine held a stubborn defense for months. The Russians, determined to secure a symbolic victory, hurled wave after wave of attacks. On the morning of October 19th, the forest sector, north of the city, witnessed one of the year's cruelest clashes. A company of the 47th Separate Mechanized Brigade Magura, commanded by filmmaker and former political prisoner Oleg Sentsov, received orders to retake lost positions along the tree line. What began as a limited night operation turned into a 5-hour battle against Russian forces vastly superior in numbers. The 47th Brigade was no newcomer to war. Formed in 2022, it had fought in the south before being rushed to Avdiivka in mid-October. Its soldiers operated American Bradley vehicles, Leopard tanks, and a specialized FPV drone attack company. Oleg Sentsov, known by the call sign Grunt, commanded one of the infantry companies. At 47, he had traded his film camera for life in the trenches. Arrested by the Russians in 2014 for opposing the annexation of Crimea, he spent 5 years in penal colonies before being exchanged in 2019. When the full-scale invasion began in 2022, he enlisted at once. He was not the kind of commander who stayed in the rear. On that day, Sentsov was up front with his men, GoPro clipped to his helmet almost by chance. The operation had been planned carefully. 3 Ukrainian assault groups were to advance at night and retake 3 positions along nearly a kilometer of forest. Sentsov's group, about 13 soldiers, was tasked with holding a 150-meter wide trench. Light resistance was expected. The reality was different. At dawn, while the Ukrainians were still taking up positions, the Russians launched a massive assault. Columns of armored vehicles carrying mounted infantry advanced in several directions against the positions of the 47th, the 110th Mechanized Brigade, and the Separate Presidential Brigade. Ukrainian reconnaissance drones captured the images. More than 100 vehicles, the equivalent of nearly 2 brigades, converging on the narrow sector. The Ukrainians had not anticipated such a concentration of men and machines in so small an area. The first warnings came over the radio. "Enemy columns approaching," reported an observer. The brigade's FPV drones went into action immediately. Operators, seated in safer positions behind the lines, guided the small explosive vehicles with surgical precision. One after another, the drones dived onto tanks and troop carriers. Explosions lit the gray sky. "They kept falling, recalled a soldier watching the drone feed. Ukrainian artillery opened fire next, hammering the columns trying to regroup. But the Russian infantry, in successive waves, kept advancing. Some dismounted and ran toward the trees, seeking hand-to-hand combat. Sentsov and his men had already entered the trench. The ground was typical of Donbas, a narrow strip of pines and bushes, shallow trenches dug in haste, loose soil and broken branches. Sentsov's GoPro, switched on by accident when he adjusted his helmet, recorded everything with raw clarity. "Into the trench, quickly," he ordered. The soldiers spread out, Dima Al-Qaeda, the deputy commander, on the left, Red, the tactical medic who also carried a rifle, German on the MG3 machine gun, Jew and others on the flanks. They controlled only 40% of the trench system. The rest was held by the Russians, or still in dispute. Shooting began almost at once. Tracer rounds cut the air. Grenades fell close. "The orcs are throwing grenades our way," Sentsov warned over the radio. Competent orcs, keeping their distance. The Ukrainians answered with disciplined fire. German and Jew dropped 3 Russians trying to close from the left. "They're not running anymore," Jew reported in a calm voice. The machine gun jammed. Sentsov called for help to clear it. "Conserve ammunition," he repeated. "We'll need every round." Meanwhile, the rest of the front boiled over. Russian columns kept coming. FPV drones destroyed vehicle after vehicle. A brigade Bradley advanced to provide fire support. Driver Boric felt an RPG strike the flank. "The car held," he said later. I barely felt it. The Bradleys disembarked pairs of infantry, who ran to the trenches, reinforcing the positions. Leopard tanks also entered the fight, firing directly at enemy infantry and at a Russian tank that came too close. In Sentsov's trench, the combat turned to close quarters. The Russians pressed from both sides. "They're shouting for us to surrender," one soldier recounted. "Stupid cattle, surrender." No one obeyed. Al-Qaeda was hit in the chest and arm. "Get this helmet off me," he asked, bleeding. Red applied improvised dressings. "Stay still, I'm taping this." Mishka, another soldier, took a round through the chest. The medic treated him under fire. Sentsov was lightly wounded by shrapnel in the ribs. "I'm still green," he reported over the radio. "Notify command." The 50-meter trench filled with wounded. Soldiers dragged their comrades to the rear, covering one another with fire. Grenades exploded a few meters away. Russian tanks brushed past the position, breaking the vegetation with machine gun fire. "Tank! Down!" someone shouted. The Ukrainians fired on the infantry, riding the armored vehicles. We hit a lot of them, but the pressure never let up. Sentsov's group was surrounded. Two other Ukrainian assault groups attacking neighboring positions suffered heavy losses. One was almost wiped out. Calls for support grew urgent. "We need a drone now," Sentsov transmitted. "We're under AGS fire from the Ottoman direction." The FPVs responded. One operator dived his drone into a Russian nest. "This is for my friends," he said, according to later accounts. The Bradleys returned for extraction. Two armored vehicles approached under a smoke screen thrown by grenades. "If it weren't for the smoke, we'd all be dead," Sentsov recalled. The wounded were loaded. Al-Qaeda could not walk. "Leave me here with a rifle," he asked. "Not happening," the commander replied. "We're getting you out." The men moved in groups. Four climbed into the first Bradley, 7 into the second. The vehicles withdrew 1.2 kilometers under fire, their automatic cannons sweeping the Russians who tried to pursue. Behind them the forest smoked. Enemy vehicles burned. Artillery and drones kept working until the Russian assault lost momentum. Estimates from overflights indicated around 900 Russians put out of action in that small sector alone. The day ended with the Ukrainian line intact. Sentsov's company failed to take the remaining 100 meters of trench, but it prevented the flank from collapsing. 3 of the 13 men were wounded, including the commander. Other groups paid a higher price. For the Russians, the cost was far greater. The columns that advanced were decimated by drones, artillery, Bradleys, and Leopards. The 47th Brigade, together with neighboring units, turned what should have been a quick breakthrough into a slaughter. Anastasia Blyschyk, the brigade's press officer, interviewed the participants days later. Their words revealed the naked reality of combat. One soldier described the initial plan. "We went in small groups because we know how to work efficiently that way." Another spoke of the wounded. "We lost some, and for us those losses are painful and hard." Sentsov, in a later interview, summed it up. "We tried to retake a strip of forest almost a kilometer long. We entered, took 50 meters, and could advance no farther because of strong enemy infantry resistance." He accepted the risk. In war, 90% of assault actions are like this. The battle was not isolated. It formed part of the major Russian offensive launched at the beginning of October against Avdiivka. The Russians threw entire brigades onto a narrow front, repeating the tactics seen at Bakhmut. Infantry in waves, armored vehicles as support, little concern for losses. The Ukrainians, fewer in number but better coordinated, used the new weapon of the battlefield, FPV drones. They compensated for numerical disadvantage with precision and speed. The Bradleys and Leopards supplied the weight of fire that infantry alone could not provide. Tactically, the fight highlighted several lessons. First, the importance of reconnaissance. Ukrainian drones spotted the columns before they reached the trenches. Second, rapid adaptation. The planned night operation collided with a larger attack. The Ukrainians switched from offense to defense without losing control. Third, the value of armored extraction. Without the Bradleys coming close to the trench, Sentsov's group could have been annihilated. Fourth, the human factor. Wounded soldiers insisted on continuing to fight. Medics like Red worked under direct fire. Commanders like Sentsov kept calm on the radio, coordinating fire, ammunition, and withdrawal. Strategically, Avdiivka represented more than a piece of ground. Controlling the city meant dominating supply routes to the rest of Donbas and scoring immediate victory. The Russians needed a triumph after months of stagnation. The Ukrainians knew this and resisted. The 47th Brigade, with its Western equipment and modern doctrines, showed that quality and innovation could balance quantity. The forest that Sentsov and his men defended was only a few hectares, yet it symbolized the zero line, a place where war is decided meter by meter, bullet by bullet. The following days brought more fighting. Avdiivka held until February 2024, when Russian pressure finally took it. But the cost to the attacker was disproportionate. Thousands of Russians died in the approaches to the city. The 47th continued to fight, rotating between sectors, always with the same Bradleys and drones. Sentsov survived that day and kept serving. Years later, he would use the GoPro material to produce the documentary reel, a 90-minute record of war without editing, without music, without embellishment. The film shows what the ordinary viewer rarely sees: the exhaustion, the controlled fear, the determination of ordinary men who decided not to retreat. On that October 19th, none of the 13 soldiers in Sentsov's company died. They left wounded, exhausted, covered in dirt and blood, but alive. They carried their comrades, returned fire, called for support, and withdrew in good order. The trench they defended did not fall. The line held. It was a small but real victory in a war of attrition where every meter counts. Their bravery did not lie in cinematic heroic gestures. It lay in persistence, in continuing to shoot when ammunition ran low, in dragging the wounded while grenades exploded, in believing the position was worth the price. The war in Avdiivka revealed the new face of modern combat. Cheap drones destroy. The war in Avdiivka revealed the new face of modern combat. Cheap drones destroyed expensive tanks. Trained infantry offset numerical disadvantages. Commanders like Sentsov, who understood both storytelling and suppressive fire, gave cohesion to small groups. The 47th Brigade, with its mix of veterans and newcomers, Western equipment and adapted Ukrainian doctrine, proved that creative defense could stop massive offensives. The credits of the documentary produced by the brigade list the names of those who turned chaos into historical record. Anastasia Blyschyk, press officer, conducted the interviews that gave voice to the soldiers. Oleksandr Kleinin operated the camera that captured the day. Irina Lyadkovic handled editing. Andrew Barba took care of sound. Volodymyr Pashchuk created the graphic design. Drone footage came from the 47th Brigade's own attack UAV company. Without them, the world would not have seen what really happened in that strip of forest. Today, looking back, the October 19th, 2023, combat appears as a microcosm of the larger war. There were no grand maneuvers. There were no tanks racing across open fields like in old books. There were shallow trenches, hand-thrown grenades, drones buzzing overhead, wounded dragged through mud, and men deciding minute by minute not to yield. Sentsov's company fulfilled its mission. It held the line. It bought time for the rest of the defense to reorganize. It paid the price in blood and exhaustion but kept the promise: defend the ground to the last cartridge. This is the reality of the battlefield in 2023. Brutal, exhausting, devoid of glamour. But also human. Ordinary men and women, some with war names like Red or Al-Qaeda, others with stories like Sentsov's, fighting not for abstractions but for the lives of the comrades beside them. Their bravery lay exactly in this, continuing when everything suggested it was time to stop. In Avdiivka on that October day, they stopped an offensive that seemed irresistible. Not with speeches, but with precise fire, fast drones, and the simple decision not to retreat. Autumn continued. The mud grew deeper. Avdiivka resisted for more months. But the forest episode entered the 47th's history as an example of how a small, well-led unit supported by technology can alter the course of a much larger attack. The soldiers who left that trench carrying the wounded knew the day had been hard. They also knew that as long as they were there, Avdiivka would not fall easily. And it did not fall. Not that day. The forest, after the fight, was marked by fresh craters and broken branches. Russian bodies lay scattered among the trees, some still with intact equipment. The Ukrainians collected what enemy ammunition they could. They returned to rear positions to resupply and treat wounds. Red continued caring for the comrades even after hours without sleep. Al-Qaeda was evacuated to a field hospital, where doctors confirmed the wounds were not fatal. Sentsov, with shrapnel in his ribs, refused prolonged treatment. He wanted to return to command as soon as possible. In the following weeks, the 47th Brigade analyzed the combat in after-action reviews. The drones had been decisive. They destroyed dozens of vehicles and prevented the Russian columns from breaking the line. The Bradleys proved their worth as a versatile platform, able to transport, fire, and protect. The infantry showed that training in small groups compensated for numerical disadvantage. But the lessons were also harsh. Intelligence had underestimated the size of the Russian attack. Coordination between assault groups needed more redundancy. And trench warfare demanded physical and mental endurance far beyond anything any simulation could prepare for. Oleg Sentsov, in later interviews, never romanticized the day. "We accept that we can be killed," he said, "but it is always frightening." For him, war was 90% actions like that. Small units fighting for meters of ground, under constant fire, with air and armored support arriving when possible. Victory lay not in spectacular conquests, but in not losing what was already held. Avdiivka was a matter of prestige for the Russians. For the Ukrainians, it was native soil that would not be handed over without a fight. The documentation of the combat, made by the brigade itself, became a unique record. For the first time, the public saw war through the soldiers' eyes, the camera shaking as they ran, the muffled sound of grenades, the cry of wounded, followed by "Hold on, the Bradleys are coming." The film has no dramatic soundtrack. It has the real sound of battle. It has the hoarse voices of exhausted men. It has the raw reality of a trench where life and death are decided in seconds. Years later, when historians look at the Avdiivka campaign, October 19th will stand as a classic example of modern defense. It was not a battle of giant armies. It was a battle of companies, of platoons, of individuals. Sentsov's company, with 13 men, faced forces equivalent to hundreds. It held. It paid the price. And it allowed the rest of the line to remain. That is the essence of positional war in Donbas. Not defeating the enemy at once, but wearing him down day after day, meter after meter. The soldiers who fought their return to combat. Some were promoted. Others were transferred to other sectors. But the bond formed in that forest remained. They knew what it meant to depend on one another. They knew the value of a well-guided drone, of a Bradley that arrived at the right moment, of a commander who did not abandon the wounded. Their bravery was not loud. It was quiet, persistent, made of small decisions that, added together, prevented collapse. Avdiivka fell months later. The Russians paid dearly for the conquest. The 47th Brigade continued fighting elsewhere, always with the same spirit. The documentary produced by the brigade still circulates, serving as a lesson for new generations of soldiers. It shows that even against superior numbers, preparation, technology, and human determination can make the difference. In that autumn of 2023, on the zero line of Avdiivka, Oleg Sentsov's company fulfilled its mission. It defended the forest. It saved comrades. It resisted. And in doing so, it gave the country one more day of freedom. It was not a grand victory on the maps. It was a victory on the ground, in the mud, in the blood, and in the will not to retreat. And that is exactly how wars are won, one hard day at a time.
Я не вийду, Макс.
Мы тебя вынесем, блядь. Катя, можна його підняти, щоб не наскочив?
Друже, я не можу стати так, блядь, не то що цей.
Понял. Мы поможем сейчас ему, короче.
Який з адреналін колот, я попробую, може.
Все, все, тихо, тихо. Банки уже едут, тихо.
Ми почали маневрувати, і водій, сваха, побачив, що хлопці біжуть до нас. Я тоді прийняв рішення вистрілити дими, щоб прикрити їх.
Мужики, я не можу йти. Стоп! Ай, тільки не по нозі, блядь. Не по нозі, блядь. Чекайте, терпіть. Сука, нахуй.
Все, возьми его, как бы он не кричал, короче, тащишь его, блядь, за руки держишь. Все. Чуешь, не бросаешь.
Я понял. Старайся не кричати, щоб не чули.
Ну, ми от тоді насипали гармату і трохи залп із цих димових гранат. Воно таки дало теж свій ефект психологічний, що від несподіванки, що то таке, трохи то їх збило.
Так, все тут?
Так.
Ти йдеш останній, Риш йде перший. Йдеш перший з прикриттям туди.
Щас.
До Бредлі дійшла, з Бредлі закрила, ти взяв магазин і від Бредлі починаєш працювати далі.
Щас.
Бабка під'їхав максимально близько, я навіть ще вже потім чув, що хлопці біжуть. І він відкрив рамку, щоб вони швидко вскочили.
Пошла!
Підніми мене, чуєш?
Давай, давай!
Затягуйте!
Ноги! Ноги, Аслан, давай быстрее!
Ну, ми погрузилися і виїхали. Ну, там, скільки нам, минути 4 мені повдачі. Там кілометр 200 ми там гнали.
Мужики, я прошу вас, на ноги мої.
Братан, ще раз мені таке пізнаєш, дайте автомат, я устаю!
Прикладом по зубам.
Да.
Потрібно, щоб його одразу забрали медики.
Екіпажі Бредлі показали себе відмінно. Поставлені задачі ми виконали те, що вимагалося від нас.
Притримай, ноги, тримайте.
Також залучалися леопарди. Леопарди відпрацювали спочатку по живій силі противника і по техніці, яка їхала, яка пересувалася. От, точно, що можу підтвердити, бачив на власні очі. Леопарда було знищено інший танк. Прямим влучанням, прямою наводкою леопардом було знищено інший танк і точно була знищена піхота противника. Трошки незрозуміло, для чого знищити таку кількість техніки, таку кількість особового складу за якусь там невеличку ділянку. Орієнтовні втрати, які ми бачили через наші там обльоти і так далі, це в районі 900 людей.
Авдіївка стратегічно їм не потрібна. Їм потрібна якісь перемоги, якийсь медійний простір для своїх тих недорусських. І все.
На фоні їхніх провалів на Запорізькому напрямку, на Бахмутському напрямку їм треба показати якусь мінімальну перемогу. За Авдіївку вони подаються вже доволі давно. От, і відповідно, думаю, перше, щоб показати своєму споживачу, що вони чогось таки добилися.
Перемоги тут їм не буде, і вони її не побачать тут. Поки ми тут, вони її не побачать. Поки всі хлопці, які тут знаходяться, вони її не побачать. Цієї перемоги.